Well, camera's rolling, so that's you.
Great. All right. Can I stand here? Or
You can move wherever you want. It's my job.
all right. So I can dance?
If you want.
That would be extremely embarrassing. Anybody see a whiteboard here? Good afternoon.
Hello.
We awake?
Yeah.
That's okay. You can take a nap after that sandwich. It's good. So my talk today, Inurlrobotstxt. What are you hiding? Kind of an interesting talk, especially, I guess, get a quick hands. Anybody here do red team work? Actual penetration testing? Oh, wow. All right. So this will be something fun you can play with too if you're interested in learning some stuff about some organizations. Let's see, is this thing going to work or is it going to lag? So who am I? David Young, former Army veteran. Was working in the IT industry for around 17 years. Matter of fact, I used to work desktop at this hospital, which was an interesting experience in itself back when Ohio Health bought doctors. But that's, if you want to catch me for those stories, I can give those to you. Last 8 years in information security. So I worked healthcare, I worked government. I see a couple of people I worked government with here. And now I'm working in financial. Work for a large financial institution. I'm not going to say because even though they know I'm here, you know, think of one of the major credit cards and then we can talk about it. Presented at, last year I presented here at BSides. I've presented at DerbyCon. I've also presented at, in Dayton, there's the Ohio Information Security Group. I go there every so often. It is kind of a long haul from Columbus, but it is worth it if you want to go there and support them. Amateur log picker, very amateur, nowhere near as good as Adrian here.
I'm not that good.
Avid gamer, listen to nerdcore rap, dual-core rocks. Anybody heard of them? Dubstep, likes anime, Gundam models, and part-time zombie. It's the bottom picture there. Actually, no, that's after a car wreck. I had a lot of people, I posted that picture on Facebook, and were like, were you in a car wreck? I'm like, yeah, that's what I did. I had a wreck and I posted a selfie of it. So what are we going to discuss today? I'm going to define robots.txt if you're not familiar with it. I'm going to show where this fits in the pen testing methodology, show how this information might be useful for you, how to gather the information, which is just extremely simple, and then show some interesting examples that are out there on the internet. Make me crazy. So what is robots.txt? I'll kind of read it off for you. The Robot Exclusion Standard, also known as the Robots Exclusion Protocol, or robots.txt protocol, is a convention to prevent cooperating web spiders and web robots from accessing all or parts of a website otherwise publicly viewable. Sounds fairly simple. The catch with this is there is no official standards body, RFC, for the robots.txt protocol. It was just kind of created by a consensus in June of 1994 by members of the robots mailing list. And that was kind of interesting in my research when I discovered that. So it relies on the cooperation of the web robot. Now what this means is if they choose to ignore your robots.txt file, they're going to scan and index everything you have. I think Budai, a Chinese one, is real infamous for that, and there's a few others that are out there. They'll crawl every directory they can find. What's nice about it, though, is the site owner can give certain directories that they don't want indexed. Is anybody familiar with the Google hacking database by Johnny Long? Yeah, a lot of Google, what I call Google dorks, where you can go out there and say in URL, you're searching for certain things, passwords.txt. And you can find websites that actually have a file that have passwords.txt out there. It's kind of scary. This is so if you have that certain directory and you don't want them to index that and make it searchable, you tell them not to search that directory. So a little example, might be a little skinny for some, a little tiny for you to read back there, but essentially it's just a text file in the web root called robots.txt. and it gives a user agent string, and then either an allow or disallow for that user agent string. So the top example says user agent string star, which means everybody, any bot that comes here. Disallow has nothing, which means they're allowed to crawl every directory or subdirectory you can find. User agent star, and then you just put a slash there. That means I'm not allowed to crawl any parts of my site. That's if you obey the Inurlrobotstxt protocol. I hate calling it a protocol because there's no real standard to it. That's kind of how it's referred to. And the bottom example shows like don't crawl CGI bin or images or temp or private. And those are common ones. So those aren't indexed. A little bit of where this fits in. This is a little old, I noticed, and I'm sorry, that's the only. You see this all over the place when you take training everywhere in the world, but when you want to go find an image to put in your slide deck, you can't seem to find the one you want. Actually, a lot of times, number one should be scope, then reconnaissance, scanning, and all around the circle. So where does this fit in? Now, I say it kind of fits in with reconnaissance. Some could argue it goes in with scanning, but depending on how you're doing it, and I'll discuss this a little bit later, it's either passive or active scanning, depending on how you're acquiring the information. Generally, I go the passive route. You don't want to be too noisy in the beginning. And if you're just doing reconnaissance, you're just trying to figure out who's my target, what am I after, where are the goodies? So, okay, David, how is this useful to me? So, I kind of define footprinting here as a technique of gathering information about computer systems and the entities they belong to. Fairly standard definition. The robots.txt file is world readable. It has to be, so that the bots can read it and either obey it or disobey it, depending on their preference. Has to be set this way so the robots can read, as I said. It makes it easy for you to read also. So here's just kind of an interesting example. Wow, I really distorted that image, didn't I? Let's get on my screen. So some real world examples where this comes in really helpful. If you look on the right, WordPress. That's a popular one. You go to and WordPress on installation defaults this robots.txt file automatically into your installation. So if you pull robots.txt and you see exclude wp-admin, well, now you know you have a WordPress site that you can go after. Drupal doesn't quite tell you that it's Drupal, but it does give you some interesting files or directories to go look at. Now, theoretically, hopefully, if you follow the instructions on the installation, you set some of these directories to where they're not world readable. That doesn't always happen. A couple other examples. Here's Joomla. Joomla does point out right away, because you see up there in the top. If the Joomla site, all right, know what I'm working with there. Let's hit exploit DB and Google, search Joomla there, see what we can find. Zoops. A lot of people might not be familiar with that. I kind of like that framework, even though it has its flaws. It has a few things in there too. It doesn't really tell you right away, but you can see some interesting directories you might want to go look at. I really like the /kernel one. That one would draw my eye immediately. A little hard to read, but just some real world examples. Microsoft.com, for some odd reason, doesn't want you in a lot of their stuff. And this was much longer. This is concatenated. If I would have made it all fit, you wouldn't be able to read it. Semantic.com has a lot of directories they don't want you in. A lot of them are different languages in that too, as you go through them. It was a fairly long list there. Let's see where we're going with next. If you wanted any hints as to where I worked, you can read it. There's a lot more to that. Who are my Ohio Health people? Don't yell at me. I couldn't do it without. You guys aren't hiding too much. So, where does it all go horribly wrong? So a lot of web admins began to use this thinking they could hide or protect their directories. When all actuality, all it was doing was preventing the legit search engines from being able to index those directories. Like I said before, the robots do not have to follow the robots.txt file. They can still go in there. A lot of them are very famous for this. They're still indexing those directories. You can still find a lot in even Google too. So now, what can we do with this information? Well, firstly, as I showed in like the Joomla and WordPress, you can tell what framework they're using. Based off of that, just go out and start searching for vulnerabilities in WordPress, for vulnerabilities in Joomla. ExploitDB is one of my favorite websites to go to. That was after, of course, Millworm shut down, if anybody's familiar with that site. You can begin to crawl these directories. Now, will this give you pwn to own always? No. Sometimes, if their security is set right, you still won't be able to get into these directories. Now, if they're just blocking it from search engines, but you can still get into those directories, like CGI bin's a fun one a lot of times, stuff like that. Administrator, admin, those are always fun directories to be able to hit or browse to, especially if you want to try to break into the back end of the website. This is going to be a quick one. So, how do you gather the robots.txt file? Well, it's really simple. www.domainname.net.com/robots.txt. And it'll display to you right there in the browser. That's the passive way to do it. A lot of these web scanners that you can use, BERT, I know, WIC2, W3AF, all of them, they'll pull this information. BERT could be considered passive depending on how you're using it. But I know W3AF and NIC2 and all them, that's where we can get into the debate of passive versus active scanning. How noisy do you want to be? So that's the scary thing. But the easiest way is just to go to the website /robots.txt and see what you can see. So then the question, of course, invariably becomes, can I protect my robots.txt file? Well, unfortunately, no. If you want the legitimate search engines to obey this and not crawl those directories and not index it so that your config.php, well, that makes me cringe, doesn't show up on Google, you have to have that file out there, and it has to be world readable. Also, too, it's good to understand that robots.txt was not meant to protect directories from being seen. The best practice for a lot of this, of course, is to set up an HT access if you're using an Apache or a Linux type system, or an IIS, I think they say disable anonymous access. So, password protect those directories or set those directories up, Best case is if you don't need it, delete it. If it's not needed within the app. If it's needed, but you don't want it world readable, just set the permissions correctly on there so it's not world readable. And it's only readable by who needs it. I did do some research, and during my research, I did find something interesting. Some people were talking about, well, why don't we send the script kiddies, as they call them, on a wild goose chase? You could set up a robots.txt file and give a bunch of bogus directories that would entice them to go after them. Administrator, payroll, something really juicy. Passwords are hidden here. Now you might think, well, that's way too obvious. I hate to say I'd try looking there. Then you can set up some logging or your IDSs to say, hey, if somebody's hitting these directories, we might want to take a look at this person and see what they're doing. What other activity are you doing against our website? Now, I say block. I do know a lot of organizations don't block automatically. Depending on your customer base, you have to be careful with that. I know some areas, certain countries are automatically blocked. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, depending on where you work. So it's a matter of you have to get with your incident response team and see what the policies are and procedures about either blocking an IP or maybe just monitoring an IP from there. Now, the catch with monitoring an IP I'll bring up too is somebody does have to be looking at the logs. You can monitor things all day long, but if somebody doesn't pay attention to it, that's a whole nother discussion that we could talk about. Well, I guess what I got next is I got some really interesting ones that I found on the internet. Anybody have any questions so far? Comments? Criticism? Isaac Asimov, iRobot. Anybody familiar with that? 3 laws? So Yelp, but they put it in their robots.txt. Last.fm, I'm not familiar with what that site is, but they have the 3 laws and the disallow. Yeah, I know Will Smith did a version, but I prefer this version. Reddit. Now, some of these might be older. I don't know if they're still there or not. But I thought this was kind of interesting. For Bender, my shiny metal ass. Anybody familiar with who Gort is? Hopefully. Yeah, I know Keanu Reeves did another version. No, we'll stick with this version. Google even gets in on the fun once in a while. This one's really old, so it's not there now. It's an interesting Easter egg. What's the year say on there? 2008, during Halloween, they decided to protect themselves against the zombies. So if your user agent was zombies, they disallowed you from the brains. People get kind of amusing. Another interesting one was Etsy. The problem is if you look somewhere where kind of 882 lines later, you find this at the very bottom. Some of these robots.txt files get huge. And I'm thinking, why do you have that much out there on the internet if you feel you don't want that much indexed? You need to relook at your directory, your website, and your web app and what you're doing. But I decided to be nice and not make you read through all 885, I think, lines was it total. Nike's was very interesting. Top of theirs, they say, Nike.com robots.txt, just crawl it. And of course, they have this interesting ASCII art at the bottom there. I did find a t-shirt for the ladies. There, if the user agent's alcohol, disallow cheesy guys, meatheads, douchebags, and hangover. But we couldn't leave the guys out. We had to have one for the guys too. Not sure I agree with all of this, but the user agent's alcohol, disallow cougars, drunk cows. I'm not sure why SEO secrets are there, and hangover. Unfortunately, wow. Hope you guys don't mind having a little nap or conversation afterwards. I did find this interesting cartoon out there. Robots.txt protecting since 1994. Actually, for my daughter, the user agent is going to be any guy disallow / Unfortunately, that went a lot quicker than I thought. Maybe I talked too quick. Do we have any questions? Do you think they find this useful? I will tell you too, just for fun, go out and check certain websites. Check your own organization's website, see what they have. And it might make you want to start asking the question, why don't we want that browsed? And then is it accessible from the internet? Because if there's something sensitive in there and you browse into that directory listing, a lot of times you'll find /images, they'll say, don't index my /images. Okay, they're just JPEGs. But then it's still directory listable. So you still go in, browse to /images, you can see everything that's in there. Sometimes somebody will drop the wrong file, the wrong directory on the web server. It's always fun to find that, config file that you shouldn't find. PHP sites are infamous for that. If you have a PHP site, all your config.php should be somewhere else, not in the web root. And a lot of the sites nowadays, they'll tell you, move it out of the web root, put it in another directory, and then point to it. The MySQL.config, those are fun ones too, because that's usually in plain text, it stores your MySQL password that you're using for the website to access it. I'm sorry it went that quick, but questions? Here's my contact information. Sign me up for whatever mailing list you want. That's okay. I'm good with it. Spam me. And my Twitter handle. All right. Thank you.